Hello, this is Raf Alvarado and welcome to Exploratory Text Analytics. In this video we're going to look at the concept of cultural analytics as described by Lev Manovich in the reading for this week. The term cultural analytics was coined by Lev Manovich around 2004, 2005. The term may have existed before he actually coined the term back then, but its current usage and the reason we use it today has to do with his coinage of it and the work that he has done. I will point out that what Lev Manovich does specifically, as opposed to the broad framework that he describes in the paper, his specific work is very unique and is not can't be considered to be exhaustive of the field of cultural analytics. It's a broad field, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. We often refer to cultural analytics as CA for short. It's the name of an established journal in digital humanities that often goes by the name of CA. The key idea that I want to introduce here is that the concept of cultural analytics, as introduced by Lev Manovich, bridges the digital humanities and a field called social computing, which is adjacent to and related to data science. You remember that digital humanities is one of the ancestors contributing fields to exploratory text analytics. And here we look at how digital humanities is related to this other field of social computing, and we look at this important work, bridging work that Manovich has done to connect the two. Because in many ways, it's the marriage of digital humanities and social computing, where social computing is broadly conceived to cover the computational approach to the study of culture and text and other artifacts. It's that bridging work that is the space within which exploratory text analytics emerges and thrives. He points out that the two fields, digital humanities and social computing, have contrasting methods and kinds of text. They have, in particular, they have contrasting styles, or scales rather, in addition to styles. So digital humanists tend to work on smaller collections of historical texts, whereas those involved in social computing tend to work on much, much larger collections of contemporary text. But they do have a common focus on textuality, and there is a lot of back and forth and possibility of knowledge transfer. In particular, in this course, we're interested in taking some of the methods from the social computing / data science space and to migrate those toward digital humanities. But we're also interested in using digital humanities as our domain knowledge for what textuality is in general, and have that transfer back to the study of contemporary text and social media the way that social computing does. And the idea here is to combine qualitative and quantitative methods to study culture. That's really what we're interested in. And we talked earlier about the use cases in a previous video. We talked about the uses and applications of exploratory text analytics. And we talked about how it can be, these methods can be applied to a wide variety of standard applications in data science and in machine learning. But in this course, we are specifically concerned, the bias is toward the application of these methods to the study of culture. This work, I'll point out, continues the work of cultural anthropology, which is my background. Although we're not going to do cultural anthropology per se in this course, it's important to understand that the study of culture proceeds from the field of cultural anthropology, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. So the point here is that the cultural analytics idea that I'm introducing to you and the essay by Manovich are really there to provide a frame, a mental frame for the content and scope of this course. Not so much for the methods, the particular methods described, and we'll get into that also. One way of thinking about this is that we're doing cultural analytics by means of exploratory text analytics. Cultural analytics frames the E in ETA. And here's a little shout out, a screenshot of Lev Manovich, who is a really interesting person, and I advise you, or suggest that you, encourage you rather, go out on the web and look at his work. He's got some really interesting visualizations out there. Okay, so a big part of this course depends on the concept of culture. This is not an introduction to anthropology course, but I do want to give you a broad feel for what we're talking about here, because it's going to come up a lot when we do these different methods downstream. I'm going to make certain assumptions about the concept of culture that I'd like you to share. First of all, it's important to understand that there are two broad definitions of culture, and this is a definitional split that goes back to the 18th and 19th centuries. The first definition is probably one that many of you are familiar with or probably even mean by culture, and this is what the critic Matthew Arnold, British, in 1869 called the best that has been thought and said. And this is a very aristocratic view of culture. But even I would point out in a populous democratic society such as ours, we still think of culture this way. We still talk about high culture and low culture. And we also talk about culture as that which is produced and explicitly defined by a sector of society to be consumed, like theater is culture, art is culture, television is culture. We may call it popular culture, but we think about it as products, as it were, aesthetic products that are meant to be consumed. So even though we don't have the aesthetic definition, we're still pretty much in the same boat as Matthew Arnold in thinking about it as stuff that has been thought and said or presented and created that we want to consume for one reason or another. But there's another definition, a scientific definition, that Manovich iterates here and which is shared by many, which is that basically culture is everything that's created by everybody. It's a distinctive activity of the human species, and as we're finding out, other species as well. Although it seems pretty clear that this is something that human beings have really optimized and something that human beings have really developed as part of adaptation. Cultural anthropology uses this definition, the scientific definition. Basically, culture is that which is produced or expressed by everybody at all times. One definition of anthropology is the study of all people at all times. Well, culture is equally broad and general as that. But I would point out that what we're talking about when we're talking about culture, in addition to things that within our complex society we tend to think of as the province of certain people who are creatives and who create culture, really it includes much more than artifacts. It includes beliefs and behaviors, and we're talking about beliefs and behaviors of everyone. In reality, the belief is that the premise in cultural anthropology is that beliefs and behaviors of the kind that we're talking about are essential to the constitution of society itself, that you wouldn't have society without these things. More specifically, within anthropology, we tend to think about beliefs as being divided between what's called ethos and worldview. An ethos is what you might call the moral framework or the moral sensibility of a society, and worldview you might call the sort of outlook, the world picture they may have, how they think the universe is ordered or constructed, whether it's chaotic or whether it's organized by fate, whether there is a single God, whether there are many gods, or whether there is no God. That's what we would put into worldview. And also, even though this sounds like it's non-modern, the manifestation of ethos and worldview is usually broken down into three areas of what we'll call symbol, myth, and ritual. And ritual we can think of broadly as behavior that is motivated by an understanding of the world, and myth we can think of broadly as any kind of narrative or textual or even aesthetic representation of the world. And symbol we can think of as the thing that's common to both myth and ritual and which expresses ethos and worldview. And these are the sort of dense clusters of meaning that human beings are known to create and which we're going to be interested in exploring within text to the extent that we can. And the bottom line of all this, literally here in the slide, is that these things that I'm describing, beliefs, behaviors, ethos, worldview, symbol, myth, and ritual, are evident in the form of patterns. And I'm going to give you some definitions of culture to help explain this. And these are classic definitions that are used by lots of anthropologists. So the first definition is one that goes back to the origin of what is called social and cultural anthropology. In England, In France, it's called social anthropology. In the United States, we say cultural anthropology for roughly the same thing. And this is a definition from the English anthropologist E.B. Tylor, who defines culture as the complex whole, which includes, and he's got a lot of things in here, knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by humans as a member of society. So that is what the original definition, and it stood the test of time, even though it's a bit of a laundry list. It really does capture the scope of things we're talking about. A more opinionated and theoretically driven definition is a famous one developed by or promoted by Ruth Benedict in 1934, the American anthropologist. And she defined culture as a consistent pattern of thought and action. Now, her perspective was that cultures could be seen as personalities writ large. And she had a very interesting theory of cultures being classifiable in terms of, say, Apollonian or Dionysian, depending on whether they favored, sobriety and purposeful action versus a kind of ecstatic, ritualistic life. And that actually is a distinction that goes back to Friedrich Nietzsche's genealogy of morals. And it's actually, quite frankly, not a compelling theory that has stood the test of time. However, the general idea that culture can be thought of as consisting of patterns, and that patterns of thought and action are distributed through populations through various acts of synchronization, such as ritual imitation and so forth. That is more compelling, and the salient point of her definition is the idea that you can think about culture as consisting of patterns. The third definition I want to give you is more recent, relatively recent. Clifford Geertz has been a towering figure in cultural anthropology. He passed away, I think, in 2006. He was at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies. And his definition was more about the informational dimension of culture as sort of a complement to genes, as a form of representation and communication of the information required to behave in a society. So his view is that it's a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms by means of which humans communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge about and attitudes toward life. We're not going to go into definitions like Richard Dawkins' concept of the meme. Although they're very powerful in certain respects, they're very weak in others. These are more mainstream notions of culture as cultural anthropologists have developed them, and which are surprisingly robust and informative when working with the kind of material we're working with. So, to summarize, culture is a complex whole of human thought and behavior that shares a consistent pattern in society and is expressed and communicated by symbolic forms. So a primary vehicle for the expression and transmission of these symbolic forms is the written word, otherwise known as texts. This is what we're focusing on this class. This is the data source that's of primary importance in this course, which gives rise to text analytics. Now, given this premise about culture and its relationship to text, a primary premise of ETA, a motivating hypothesis, if you will, is that texts contain cultural patterns, and these may be discovered through unsupervised methods. So that's the big idea here, is that by understanding, by using unsupervised methods, we have a lens through which to explore the cultural patterns that we've talked about through the texts that we have available to us.